I work with Maddie in our outreach program at Family Tree. For the next couple minutes here, I'm going to be the one sending out emails. So if I look like I'm zoning out into space, I am. Just check your email. But we'll be getting around to an activity that involves that later on in this presentation, and I will be going more in depth with the directions for that. So everyone just hang on once you get those and we'll get around to it. But thanks for being here today.
Hello again. If we met before, I'm Kayla. This time I'm mainly just going to be keeping an eye on the chat box and helping to make sure your questions get answered.
Perfect. So yeah, we've said it a few times, but as you're coming in and getting settled, if you could just send your email in the chat box and we will send you out those instructions for an activity. But let's go ahead and get started. So a lot of this in the beginning will look, will look very familiar to what we talked about last time if you were here for our DV 101. If you were not, I think you should have a recording hopefully from last time as well, and we'll do a little bit of a recap for all the info that we talked about last time. But today we're going to get a little bit more in depth. It's going to be some more dense material about the dynamics of domestic violence and how to best support your clients who might be survivors. So before we get started, just a few disclaimers. We just want to make sure that we are creating a safe space and a non-judgmental space here. Of course, it is being recorded, so being mindful again of confidentiality. But I just want you all, to understand and create this space for each other to be able to ask questions and challenge each other and even challenge us if that comes up. Of course, putting your own self-care first and doing what you need to do to take care of yourself. I know things are kind of weird being virtual all the time and being on a lot of Zoom meetings. So if you need to step away at any point, we will have a break sort of halfway through. But just please feel free to put yourself first. And when it comes to talking about the dynamics of domestic violence and the experience of survivors, we're definitely not able to speak to every experience. We know that DV affects every type of person and is super prevalent, but we do sort of talk in more general terms about survivors, and of course we can't take every experience into account. And then as far as the language that we use, so we try to keep our language gender neutral. Of course, again, everybody experiences domestic violence, but we do know that women experience DV at a higher rate than other genders, and that normally people or women who are experiencing abuse are experiencing it from men. So sometimes we slip up and we use like he and she, but we try our best to be gender neutral. So just please be mindful of that as well. And then as far as the way we talk about people who use abuse and survivors, you'll hear us using those words a lot. I know that different professionals in different fields and different systems may use words like offender and perpetrator and victim, and that's totally fine. We have a lot of stats and quotes from people who also use that language, but we just try to be like person first in our language and try to highlight that survivor might be a little bit more empowering, and person using abuse might also be a little bit more empowering than being called a perpetrator and offender. But again, we do slip up because we work within these systems. So a question for you all, if anybody would like to speak up or put something in the chat box before we get started, is what are you hoping to get out of today's training?
Hi, hi, my name's Jerry Hernandez, and I am just trying to be able to get a better understanding of someone that's going through this process of domestic violence and perhaps what I can do to help that person go through it. Thank you.
Absolutely, thank you. Those are actually our two main objectives today, so hopefully we'll definitely answer that for you.
We've got some people in the chat saying ideas to better support my children who have experienced domestic violence and more information and understanding so I can be as effective as possible as a CASA employee.
Absolutely. So we did talk quite a bit about, or as much as we could in the time that we had last time in our DV 101 about the way that children experienced and witnessed domestic violence. The domestic violence that we work with is intimate partner violence, so we won't touch on that too much today just because we did really want to get in depth in working with adult survivors. But if you would like more information about partnering with kids, or if you'd like to speak with one of us, we could definitely do that too. Anything else? All right, we're going to keep going. Thank you for those answers. So our objectives today that we're going to talk about are ways to better understand the dynamics of domestic violence and learning strategies to support your clients who are survivors of domestic violence. So we all at Family Tree in our outreach program, we only work with survivors. We don't work with people who use abuse, but we do have resources because I know that you all can't always control, of course, who you're working with and whether or not they might be surviving or using abuse. So if you would like more information about partnering with people who use abuse, we could definitely connect you with different resources as well. So our agenda for today, we are going to do a little bit of a recap for our DV 101 that we did a few weeks ago, and then we'll get more into depth about how to detect abuse and how to help with your clients who might be experiencing abuse. We have a couple really great activities to go over as well. We'll talk pretty in depth about safety planning because I know that that's always a big question that people have. We have a case study activity, and then we will talk more about Family Tree services. So our DV 101 recap. So of course, super important to talk about our definition of domestic violence within different systems and different states and different agencies. They might have different definitions of domestic violence, which of course is totally fine. But we just like to clarify to give some context to what we'll be talking about today. So we define domestic violence at Family Tree as a pattern of coercive control inflicted by one person against another in a current or former intimate relationship. I don't know why the intimate relationship cut off there. I'm so sorry. But it should say that at the end. And then coercive control is pretty much the most important part of that definition, and we define that as a range of strategies persons using abuse employ to dominate the thoughts, beliefs, perceptions, and conduct of survivors. So some really great key points there that hopefully you all remember from last time around if you were with us. And I think another really important thing to take a look at again from last time we were here is the power and control wheel. I know that a lot of you had seen this before when we brought this up in our DV 101, and that's great, but we thought we would put it up again just as a reminder. But this can be a great tool to show to clients who may be experiencing domestic violence if they're maybe having a hard time identifying what they're experiencing or sort of putting all of those pieces together if they're experiencing many different types of abuse. So this can be really helpful. Also can be really overwhelming even just as professionals taking a look at it because it's pretty dense and full of so many examples. So we do also have an example of a power and control wheel that just has the different types of abuse, and sometimes that can be helpful as well. So our cycle and patterns of violence. I know that last time we talked about the cycle of violence. If you've all seen that, it's like a circle and it has like honeymoon stage, tension and eggshells, and then I think like escalation or violent event. And a lot of survivors do identify with that as being sort of descriptive of their experience, but we like this chart a lot better because it has more examples of the different types of abuse that somebody might experience. And it also does a really great job of highlighting, you can see along the bottom, there's no time frame. So it does a great job of highlighting that, you know, a relationship can be in this contentment and comfort honeymoon zone for a really long time before it gets abusive, or before somebody decides to start using abuse, and then over time that abuse does escalate. And oftentimes you can see too, it does come back down to being peaceful and maybe feeling like a normal relationship. So even relationships that can, you know, be really violent where one person can be very abusive, oftentimes it's not all of the time. And for a good portion of that relationship, it does feel really normal. So we find that survivors identify really well with this chart and that it does a better job of giving a more holistic view of what patterns of violence might look like for somebody who's using abuse. Okay, so we did a little activity last time trying to do some myth busting around domestic violence. So I thought it was a good idea to just recap some of those facts that we talked about. So the first one being that domestic violence affects everyone and is never mutual. The four main types of abuse are physical, emotional, sexual, and economic or financial. Using abuse against another person is a choice, is something that we will highlight very often. And barriers to leaving include safety concerns and emotional and logistical barriers. So again, this is just a pretty light recap of everything we talked about last time around. For those of you who are entering, welcome and thank you for being here. If you could put your emails in the chat box, and we will send out some instructions for an activity we're going to be doing later on today. And of course, if you have any questions, please feel free to write them in the chat box as we go along, and we can stop and answer them. Okay, so that was a sort of a quick recap of everything we talked about last time. Again, hopefully you will have access to that recording of the 101 that we did last time we were here, but we're going to move on now to talk about ways to detect abuse. And this portion, and honestly a lot of the rest of our workshop today is pretty content heavy, just because we want to make sure we give you as much information as we can. Please don't feel like you need to know everything right now or understand everything right now. If you have any questions, feel free to ask, and we will do our best at answering them and making sure we explain everything fully. So we're going to talk about some indicators for abuse. So this would be things to look for in the people that you're working with that might indicate that they could be surviving abuse. So different physical indicators, such as physical injuries that you might be able to see, like bruising, ruptured eardrums. A lot of this is kind of heavy, so I'm sorry about that, but it is important. Different cuts depending on where they are on the body. Unexplained injuries and patterns of repeated injury, like if you're seeing somebody who has maybe old bruises and new bruises every time you see them, that could indicate that there's a pattern there of them experiencing abuse. They could, not want to seek medical attention or take maybe what could be perceived as too long to seek medical attention, and any stress-related illnesses, which is very broad, but just keeping an eye out for all of that. Having anxiety and panic attacks, stress and depression. Of course, mental illness is not only caused by experiencing abuse, but if you see this along with other physical or behavioral indicators, which we'll talk about in a second, that could be sort of a red flag that could go off, in your mind. Maybe they're experiencing these mental health issues as a result of the abuse. But of course, it doesn't always indicate that there is abuse present. And drug or alcohol abuse, same thing. Of course, not everybody who uses drugs and alcohol is experiencing abuse, but it could be a coping mechanism or something that someone does with their partner to make them happier because they're being pressured into doing so. So again, keeping an eye out for that along with other signs is the most important takeaway here. Some other physical indicators could be chronic headaches and vague aches and pains. Again, that's sort of, to me, that would be related to like stress-related illnesses, different abdominal pains, joint and muscle pain, having sleeping and eating disorders. If there are suicide attempts and mental health diagnoses, again, not always an indicator alone, but keeping an eye out for all of these things together. Having different problems or injuries during pregnancy is, of course, a huge red flag, and other gynecological problems, chronic pelvic pain and miscarriages. Of course, your clients won't always disclose all of these things to you. Oftentimes they probably won't, but I think it's important to just put these up here in case somebody does disclose these issues to you, or through working with other professionals that somebody might be in contact with or working with. If you are hearing about, a lot of these things and a pattern of these different physical indicators, it's definitely important to, sort of take a step back and think about what might be going on in the bigger picture or going on at home. Some behavioral indicators that somebody might be experiencing abuse, that they could appear nervous or ashamed or evasive, maybe not wanting to talk about what they're going through. They might describe their partner as being controlling or prone to anger. We do always like to clarify that there's a difference between having anger management issues and being somebody who chooses to use abuse. But oftentimes, if they're describing their partner as being controlling or prone to anger, especially if you're not seeing in their partner those behaviors, that they're able to sort of turn them on and off like a switch, that could be a big indicator that somebody is experiencing abuse. They might seem uncomfortable or anxious in the presence of their partner, or not want to speak in front of them as well. That, I mean, I think that that could be a major, not a major red flag, but something that's really easy to spot. Like if you're working with both parents or both partners together, and you're noticing that one of them is sort of making themselves smaller in the presence of their partner, I think that could be a big indicator. So on the flip side, if their partner is appearing to be overly protective or controlling of them, like blowing up their phone, or needing to know where they are at all times, or if they're always accompanied by their partner and the partner does most of the talking, again, looking out for somebody who makes themselves small in their relationship. Going back to some maybe physical related, if they're providing unlikely explanations for their injuries, I think that's something that's pretty stereotypical, that maybe we've seen like in the media and movies, about people who are experiencing abuse saying like, oh, I just fell, like I fell down the stairs. Of course, totally possible. But again, keeping an eye out for this partnered with other indicators is really important. Being recently separated or divorced, of course, people get divorced for so many reasons. But it also could be an indicator that somebody's experiencing abuse, especially because we know that when somebody who's experiencing abuse separates from their partner or tries to separate from their partner, oftentimes the person using abuse will escalate these behaviors. So if you already know that
Thank you for
somebody's
calling Liberty Mutual. This is Carissa.
Hi, if you could just mute yourselves. Okay, cool, thank you. Yes, so if somebody is trying to leave their relationship, oftentimes the person using abuse will escalate those behaviors. And so if you know that somebody's already experiencing abuse, or if you suspect that they might be, and they're also trying to separate or get divorced from their partner, just maybe keeping in mind that it could be a time for that abuse to escalate. Also being reluctant to follow advice. We always try to say, like, we try not to give advice to our clients, but if maybe you're trying to safety plan with someone and they're feeling like very nervous about it, or if you're just talking about sort of what your work together will look like and they're feeling scared maybe to change something at home or to talk to their partner about something, it could be a red flag as well. Okay, so that was kind of heavy. If anybody has any questions, again, please feel free to put them in the chat. I know that Sarah has been collecting and sending out emails for the activity that we're going to be doing later on, so I just wanted to pause and check in. Sarah, how are you doing with that? And if people are joining in, should we still have them send you their emails?
Yes, if people are joining in, please go ahead and just put your email in the chat box. We'll be doing an activity here shortly, and I'll be sending out some important information that you'll need to have. So if you could do that, that would be great. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Okay, so we talked about different things that could be an indicator that somebody's experiencing abuse. So now let's get into how to help if you feel like somebody that you're working with, maybe you've spotted some of these signs or they've even disclosed abuse to you, different ways that you can partner with them and support them. So I think a really important sort of framework to talk about that we follow at Family Tree, and that I definitely recommend sort of keeping in mind when we're working with survivors, is working under an empowerment model. And so the most important thing here is that we're centering a client's truth and their lived experiences at the center of our work together. So sort of everything that we can do for a survivor and everything that I recommend keeping in mind when working with someone is making sure that, you know, regardless of what that sounds like, and regardless of maybe you're not understanding what somebody is going through, making sure that at all of the sort of stops in your work together and all of the points where you're making decisions, to center, you know, what they're going through and what the world looks like for them. Providing tools and resources, but not telling someone what to do or setting up too much of a structure for them and how to seek help and seek services. Encouraging self-advocacy. Of course, we are all advocates here. And sometimes there are instances where it's best for us to step in and, work with other resources or service providers to make sure that our client is getting the best care that they can. But along that journey of working with a client, it is also really important to, maybe share with them some of the things that we do and say to other service providers to try to make sure that they're being treated fairly, and encouraging them to do the same for themselves as well. So there are times, again, when we need to step in, but making sure that that's what the client wants, and also that they are in a space working with us where they're always able to advocate for themselves, at least with us, and then hopefully also in the future with other people in their lives. And the most important is supporting clients in regaining power and control over the decision making in their own lives. Oftentimes, people who have experienced abuse will expect all of the relationships in their lives to mimic that, they'll expect other people to sort of make decisions for them and to have power and control over them, especially because we do work within systems that oftentimes give us a lot of power. And so clients will come to us sort of looking for answers on what to do or advice, or for someone to tell them like how to make their lives better. And that's great that they want to trust in us and come to us, but it's good to keep in mind that oftentimes when they're doing that, it's because they're so used to not having power and control over their decision making in the course of their lives. So it's really important for us at every step to try to be flipping that switch and make sure that they're, sort of in the driver's seat. I know Kayla uses a great metaphor that I have started using as well, that we're, in the car with our survivor, our client, and they're in the driver's seat, making the turns and making the decisions, and we're in the passenger seat with a map. And so that's a really cool sort of way to look at it, that we're here with all the tools and the resources, and that at the end of the day, it is up to our clients to make decisions for themselves, and we're here to support them. So that's kind of a long-winded explanation of the empowerment model. It's really deeply ingrained in the work that we do, and also there's so many resources online to read more about it as well, so I definitely encourage that. We'll talk a little bit about trauma-informed care. I know this is kind of a long slide, but I do think it's really important to touch on as well, because obviously everyone that we work with, at least in our program, has experienced trauma, and I'm sure mostly everyone that you all work with as well. So trauma-informed care assists survivors in strengthening their own psychological capacities to deal with the multiple complex issues that they face in accessing safety, recovering from the traumatizing effects of domestic violence and other lifetime abuse, and rebuilding their lives. And trauma-informed care also ensures that all survivors of domestic violence have access to advocacy services in an environment that's inclusive, welcoming, destigmatizing, and non-re-traumatizing. So of course, trauma-informed care can be applied outside of the realm of domestic violence work, but that is the context of what we're talking about today. So this can be applied really to any work and any survivors of trauma, but we do sort of look at that through the lens, at least today, of domestic violence work. So we're going to watch a video today, right now, about trauma and how it functions in the brain. So I'm just going to switch over to a different screen. I will give everyone a heads up that I think it's Scottish or Irish accents that the people in this video are talking in. So I put on subtitles or closed captions because they can be kind of hard to understand. So hopefully, if you can't understand what they're saying, you can at least see it. One sec. Okay, and just please, Sarah or Kayla, if you can't hear this, interrupt and let me know. You can't hear it?
No, there's no sound.
Okay. Well, can everyone at least who is with us on their computer see the video, and maybe we can read subtitles?
We can see the video, yes.
Okay, cool. So I'm going to play it. I'm sorry about the sound. I'm not honestly sure how to change that.
So if you go into the shared screen piece, there's a little box that you click in the left-hand side. It says share computer sound. Find it?
I did. Thank you
We
so
need
much.
to take a
Can you hear
step
it now?
so we can establish what happened on Saturday night.
What time?
We need to take a statement so we can establish what happened on Saturday night.
What time did you get back to David's flat?
What time? I don't know.
Can you give us an estimate?
I don't remember.
Would your pals remember what time you left the club?
He seemed nice.
She didn't remember much, did she?
I know. And now we've got to waste more time on a daft lecture. We know how to deal with victims. We've had years of experience.
Well, some of us have had more years than others.
I'm in my prime, I'll have you know.
That'll be right.
Today's session is about trauma. The latest in brain science will help you in your work. I'll start with a tour of the parts of the human brain. The reptilian brain maintains basic bodily functions. The limbic system is also instinctive. It deals with fear and pleasure. For example, you pat a dog, it senses pleasure, and without thinking, wags its tail. The neocortex is the site of logic, imagination, planning, and control. It's more sophisticated, but because it's conscious, it's slower than the older parts of the brain. The amygdala is a key part of the limbic system. It has one job: to sense danger and set off the alarm. When it's a matter of survival, the primitive parts of the brain override the conscious part. There are 3 possible survival responses: fight, flight, or the one that people don't think of, freeze. When the alarm goes off, blood and oxygen are diverted to muscles, adrenaline floods the body, and all systems that are not crucial to survival are switched off. Normally, the job of the hippocampus is to file memories so you can retrieve them later. But in times of danger, it stops filing memories, which makes it harder to gather evidence later on. Instead, the hippocampus switches to pumping cortisol. What's useful about cortisol is it stops us feeling pain, so we can focus on survival. Can anyone give me an example?
A farming accident where a man carried his own arm for a mile without feeling any pain?
Yes, excellent example. It is an evolutionary safety mechanism which is fast and instinctive. In essence, it's our body's very clever way of protecting us. To recap, an example of the 3 parts of the brain working together. You're standing at a bar. Your reptilian brain is keeping your heart beating. You're enjoying the pleasure of a nice pint with your limbic system. You're using your neocortex to work out if there's time for another before the last train. What could happen to make the amygdala kick in? What if this happened? The way you'd respond would depend not on your logical brain, but on your instinctive brain. Being glassed in a bar would be a traumatic experience. Who can give me another example of an event that can cause trauma?
War?
Rape?
A car crash?
Good, yes. Trauma occurs when a person is overwhelmed by something beyond their control. The survival brain takes over the rational brain. It can lead to post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, with symptoms that last at least a month. Vicarious or secondary trauma is something you may experience if you deal with incidents such as rape or sudden death, or think of Lockerbie, Dunblane. You're not superheroes. Having a brain makes you all vulnerable to secondary trauma. It's important to understand that when trauma occurs again and again, it can become complex PTSD, such as in domestic abuse or child sexual abuse. The alarm system in the brain becomes jammed. Memories are stuck in the limbic system, so a trigger can set off the alarm. The trigger could be anything: a colour, a smell, a sound, a sensation. Now, the indicators of trauma. What should you be looking out for?
Depression. Crying a lot?
Yes, that's one response. And at the other end of the spectrum, total numbness.
Nightmares. Flashbacks.
Stress.
Good, yes. And they may feel sick. Also, shame, feelings of guilt, inability to enjoy sex, social isolation, triggers. People often feel overwhelmed by the symptoms of trauma. This can lead to using alcohol or other drugs to block out memories, or self-harm, or dissociation when a person's mind detaches from reality. Indicators can be specific to the type of trauma. Say, dental problems, when someone who was orally abused avoids going to the dentist. A victim of abuse might bond strongly to her abuser. This is known as traumatic bonding, or Stockholm syndrome. And jumbled up memory, when a person's normal recording of memories doesn't work. Can you recall any times you've seen that symptom?
What time? I don't know.
A traumatized person may not seem like her usual self, or may be hypervigilant, on edge, or being startled by everyday things. Everyone is different. You never know what impact trauma will have. Symptoms can change from day to day. So what does all this mean in practice, in your job? A traumatized person's brain is protecting them, but that normal human response of self-protection can get in the way of evidence gathering. The US military has developed new trauma-informed interviewing techniques that you can use to work around this. Research shows that if someone seems vacant, they could be distracted by their traumatic memories. Try to ground them by asking a simple, non-patronizing question such as, "Are you thirsty? Do you want a glass of water?" This can help bring them back to the here and now. Don't expect a logical, linear story. Ask, "What can you recall just now?" Find out what the victim physically felt or saw. Working this way, from the instinctive sensory parts towards the logical parts of the brain, you'll get more results. In conclusion, 4 things for you to take away. Trauma response is the brain in survival mode. Repeated abuse can make trauma symptoms worse. In response to trauma, people will behave in unexpected ways. Remember, trauma is a normal human response to abnormal events.
We know that you've gone through a really painful experience, but we need to take a statement to understand what happened on Saturday night.
Are you able to tell us anything that you remember about his flat? Anything at all?
A dog. Barking.
Are you able to remember any physical sensations or feelings that you had?
Cigarette smoke. I can smell it now.
What was going through your mind?
I couldn't understand it. I just couldn't move, or even scream.
To freeze is a perfectly normal response. So you start with the memories, you don't start at the beginning. You have to engage with feelings to get to the facts.
Makes sense. Check you, Professor, getting all sciencey on us.
Well, if it gets us usable evidence.
There's life in the old dog yet.
Oi.
Alrighty, so I'm just gonna switch back to sharing the workshop. I know that was a pretty content-dense video. Does anybody, oh, my mouse disappeared. Does anybody have any thoughts or questions? Maybe some info that we already knew or some new information?
I like that last part when they said that to gain a memory or to understand the story, you don't have to start at the beginning, or even the facts, the feelings, or the senses.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's super relevant for the work that we do as well, because you never know at what point and like a survivor's stages of processing what they've experienced that they'll come to you or disclose. So yeah, that's definitely a really great point. Thank you. All right, so of course, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat box as we move along. Just a reminder to everyone to keep yourselves muted while we're going through the training today. And there will be a few opportunities, of course, to speak up. But just getting back to the concept of trauma and trauma-informed care, we like to say, instead of asking what's wrong with you, why not ask what happened to you? As we saw in the video, there are a lot of different ways that people can react to trauma, and it's really important to try to get down to the root of that with the people that we work with. And of course, we won't always do that right away, but hopefully over time and building a relationship with them. So talking about some partnership tips when it comes to starting to build that relationship with somebody who you think might be experiencing abuse. Some great ideas, of course, opening a dialogue. It can be really difficult sometimes to start that conversation about domestic violence, but I think one of the best ways to do that is just being honest and showing your concern, sharing what's worrying you about their behaviors or maybe what they've disclosed to you. Of course, not saying, I think you're experiencing domestic violence, but maybe, you've shared with me some things about your relationship that make me a little bit worried for your safety. Maybe we can talk more about that is a great way to sort of get into that conversation. Of course, being non-judgmental is something we talk about in the space today with each other, and we always want to be able to share that sentiment with our clients as well, just letting them center their experience at the work that we do together. Recognizing the danger they're in can be really helpful. Sometimes survivors might not recognize the danger that they're in, and of course that's okay, but being able to validate them and their experiences, like saying something like, I think that if that happened to me, I would be really scared and nervous for my safety, and it makes me a little bit scared for your safety as well. Or oftentimes somebody could be very terrified, but nobody else in their lives sees that and shares in that concern with them. So it can be super validating in trying to partner with someone by just sort of understanding where they're at and seeing that they're in an unsafe situation. Listening, always, of course, really important with the people we work with, practicing active listening and really engaging with someone when they're sharing with you their experiences can be very helpful. Reinforcing that it's not their fault and that they have a lot of strengths, what they've already done to keep themselves safe. We'll talk about safety planning as we get a little bit farther along here. So helping them develop a safety plan can be really helpful as well, or referring them to other people who can help make a safety plan, such as our program with Family Tree. That's something we do all the time. And this is just a bullet point, but is a huge theme that can be really hard to get past, is that desire to rescue and save and protect our clients. It's something that we don't always have control over, and of course comes from a good place, but just really important to always remind ourselves that we're not in control of their decisions and we're not responsible for making sure that they are safe, even though it can feel like that sometimes. So just a few more partnership tips. Trying to engage in conversation outside the presence of their partner is probably the most important in making sure that you are trying to keep someone safe and assure that you're not putting them in any more danger by trying to have conversations about safety and the abuse they've experienced and maybe trying to access resources. A lot of the questions that we'll talk about in a little bit as well, super important to talk about that outside of the presence of their partner. And we can also brainstorm different ways to do that as well. Maybe if you always have meetings with both partners or both parents together, different ways to try to talk with the survivor or somebody who you think might be a survivor alone is really important. Making sure that we're understanding that the survivor has probably taken many actions to protect themselves already. People who are experiencing abuse are constantly assessing for safety and doing even the smallest things to try to keep themselves safe that we might not even recognize, because they are the experts of their own situation and their own relationship. Helping survivors identify and connect with support systems is really important and can look very different depending on what the survivor's situation is. This can be a major part of safety planning as well. Respecting their decisions and how they want to reconcile with their partner, communicate with their partner, or even stay with them, which of course can be really difficult. but that is a major way to build a good relationship and make sure that they identify you as a safe person to come to, is respecting their decisions, and avoid blaming them for attempts to protect themselves that were not successful. I know a lot of, different systems. I work really closely with Child Protective Services in Jefferson County. They have to hold both parents as being equally accountable for the safety of the child. But when it comes to domestic violence, that can get really muddy because one person has more power and control over the situation than the other. And it can be difficult to make sure that we're not victim blaming or blaming someone for different safety plans that didn't work out within that system. So it's always good to check ourselves with that. Some ideas of what not to do or say. Telling people to just leave, of course, it's a sentiment that we all feel and that we all want for our survivors and our clients, and it's totally normal, but avoiding saying that to someone is really important. Disbelieving them or demanding proof, giving ultimatums, bad-mouthing the abusive partner. Oftentimes we have clients or survivors that will say really terrible things about their partners, or who will maybe tell us really terrible things about their partners. And it can be hard sometimes not to get into that with them and sort of feed into that if you're trying to build a relationship. Yeah, they do sound really terrible. They're really bad people, and it's normal to want to get into that, but if at any point the survivor's not feeling that way about their partner, they might feel like you're no longer a safe person to talk to. Avoid always giving advice, and again, discussing safety in the presence of their partner. So different supports for survivors of domestic violence, and these are very general, so we can talk more about this as well. Law enforcement victim advocates and community-based victim advocates. So we are community-based advocates. Again, the word victim is in here because of systems, and that's fine, but it's something we do try to avoid using. Trauma-informed therapists can be super helpful, and then, of course, friends and family as well. So trying to find different supports for the people that you're working with can be one of the most helpful things that we do, just sort of building up that community of people around them who want to see them safe and successful. So another major thing we can do to help the people that we work with is helping them access domestic violence shelters. So especially right now in a pandemic, it's really difficult to access space in shelters. Capacity is limited, and I would say demand is definitely higher. So encouraging them to call multiple shelters in the area and calling several times a day is really important. Space frees up all the time, and it's on a first come, first serve basis oftentimes. So it is important to always be checking back in and checking for space in different shelters. And that's a great way to encourage our clients to be advocates for themselves as well, and take a lot of that power into their own hands, is being able to call on their own and checking for space on their own. So explaining how that works can be really helpful as well, because a lot of people have different misconceptions about what shelter is like, and what that process looks like trying to access shelter. Making sure they know that they'll probably have to do a phone screening before they are offered space. So talking over the phone with an advocate in shelter about their situation, about different safety concerns, about different special needs they might have, and what life looks like for them. And of course, also making sure that the reason they need shelter is domestic violence. Oftentimes people have a lot of different issues sort of coinciding in their lives, homelessness and domestic violence, and there are different shelters for different needs. The main reason it's really important to make sure that domestic violence is the reason they need a domestic violence shelter is because DV shelters are in confidential locations, so they are reserved for people who are needing that extra layer of safety of being in a confidential and safe location. So sometimes the best thing we can do is provide information and resources to the people we're working with and take a step back. It might be a start of a really long process for a survivor, depending on, where in their lives they're coming to you. And it can be really overwhelming to be, handed a bunch of information and resources when you're just realizing that you've experienced abuse, or when you're just getting out of an abusive relationship. And so this is another really great way to put the power in the survivor and the client's hands as well, and making sure that we're providing this information and we're stepping back to let them process and make decisions that are in their best interest and that work best for them. Okay, so it is time for our activity. Hopefully you all were able to send Sarah your emails and she was able to send you out some information. So I'm gonna hand it over to Sarah to facilitate this activity, and it's really great. So hopefully you all enjoy it.
All right. Thank you everyone so much. Everyone that sent me emails, thank you for getting those to me. I know it was kind of last minute, but I appreciate it. If we could go ahead and stop sharing the screen, Maddie. For this activity, we're all going to kind of be looking at each other's videos. So if everyone, I know this is kind of a big ask, we all have lots of Zoom fatigue, but if everyone can put on their Zoom cameras, that'd be great. If you've had a chance to read through the directions, you may have read that we're going to be holding some stuff up to our screen. I will just kind of give everyone a second to check their emails and pull that Word document up if they haven't already. So I'll give everyone a moment to do that. At the top of that Word document is going to be your character info. You can look over that now, but I'll also give you another opportunity to look over that before we start. So if everyone could just mute themselves, that'd be great. Thank you. Okay, so as you are looking at this, obviously, we may not have had time to print it out since I just sent it out like 20 minutes ago. But I am going to ask that while you're looking at those places that are listed that where you can go, if you could just grab some sort of paper and like a marker and just quickly like write down those words to hold up to the screen, that would be great. I just made these, I just ripped these off of a regular big piece of paper. It doesn't have to be anything fancy. And then as a reminder, I like to put how much each one costs. So for the hotel, I have 2 money cards on the front, and for my home one, I have free written on the front. It just helps me keep track of it. So if that's helpful for you, I encourage that. I'm just gonna go ahead and give everyone a couple minutes to write all those down. I do know that based on characters, some of us don't have all of the same places as others, but for the majority, they'll be similar. All right, it looks like some of us might be done. Some of us are still writing. I'll just give us another minute and then I will start off with some of the directions.
I guess I'm just not knowledgeable enough to be able to see.
Did you send your email? Did you receive an email?
I thought I did, but just make sure that I sent it to the right place. Well, I don't want to distract from the meeting. I don't know. I'm not sure where I'm supposed to send it to.
So I can actually send you the email if you'd like.
Yes.
Okay. Would you mind giving me your email? I can send you a character card really quick.
Bruce. Oh, go ahead, sorry.
B as in boy, RUCEXCB at msn.com.
Okay, great. I'll get that out to you right now.
Thank you.
Sure.
And Zoe, I think came in late. If you could type your email in as well or say it out loud and we can send you a character card too.
What works best, Sarah?
If you want to just type it out, that would be great.
Perfect.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Okay. I am, for everyone who's getting it now, if you want to just take a few moments and kind of quickly jot down what those places are, I'm going to get going with the activity. If you aren't able to kind of get it done in time, feel free to just follow along. We'll have a discussion at the end. Okay. So these directions are super important to listen to, because throughout this activity, we are not going to be asking questions or talking to each other at all. And that is for a purpose that we'll talk about a little bit before and after. So let's go ahead and get started with those. This activity is intended to simulate the complex journey that survivors take when navigating through an abusive relationship. Even so, it is extremely simplified. Each of you has received an email describing a character who you will be playing during the course of this activity. And before we do that, let's go over some of the logistics. So first and foremost, the most important part of this activity is that you step out of your own shoes and into the shoes of the character that you have received. Because many survivors are navigating this journey alone, I'm going to ask that you do not ask questions or talk to each other for the duration of the activity. This activity is intended to be confusing and complex, and it is okay if you do something wrong or are not sure if you're doing it right. That is all intentional, as it mimics what survivors feel on this journey. You will have time, once we are done discussing the logistics of the activity, to ask questions before we actually begin. So first, just take a minute to look at the signs you have printed out or created. Like I said, most of us should have the same ones. However, depending on our character, we may have a different one thrown in. We have home, friends or family, DV shelter, hotel, apartment, the option to be homeless, and a nursing home for some people. Nursing home is specifically for people who are 65 and up or have a disability listed in their character card. Everyone also has a cat with them. However, you will see that some places allow cats and some places don't allow cats. Places that don't allow cats, that just means that if you go there, you are choosing to leave your cat at home. When you go to a new place to stay, you must pay the amount listed to stay there by crossing off or deleting the money cards or favor cards it costs to get there. So if you want to delete them on your Word document as you go through, you can do that, or you can kind of write down as like a tally sheet and cross off however you get. Each character will have a different amount of money and favor cards. If you are someone who has friends or family in the area, depending on what your character card says, the friends or family home might be off limits to you. So if it says you don't have any friends or family in the area, that is not an option for you. If you are able to go to a friend's or family's home, I want to kind of clarify that this will cost one favor card. I know some of them don't say that it costs anything on some of the character cards, and that's on our end. They should all cost one favor card for the family and friends home. As far as the homeless option, you can choose to be homeless at any time, and it is free, but obviously we want you to take yourself out of your shoes and into a character's shoes, and choosing to be homeless is not a decision that people make lightly. So although it's free and it might be an option, we do want you to really consider that as someone in their shoes. Let me pull out this little bell I have. All right, so every time I ring this bell, and hopefully everyone can hear that, every time I ring this bell, payment is due again. So you pay the price of wherever you are, and if you cannot afford it, you must leave and go somewhere else. So if you're at the hotel and you ran out of money cards and I ring this bell, you're gonna have to go somewhere that's either free or a favor card or go home. Again, it's all part of that process of making decisions. The money and favor cards that you have now are all that you'll have for the remainder of the activity. There is no way to earn more. Everyone participating has a cat. If you choose to go somewhere, you cannot take the cat. You can leave the cat at home with your partner. When you are prompted to or decide to spend money on clothes, transportation, medicine, legal services, etc., please raise your hand into the camera so that we can see everyone's decision making and it feels like we're all doing this activity in person together. Typically, this activity is done by walking around the room, so we're trying to make it a little bit more interactive for everyone by doing that. So I am going to give everyone a moment. I see there's some people in the chat box already, but if anyone has questions, now is the time to ask, because once we start, we will not be able to speak for the remainder of it.
I have a question.
Yes.
The medicine and all the resources that would cost money at the end, is that supposed to be on our email, or that's something that's in the story that you'll tell us?
That'll be in the story. Yes, so as we go through the story, some things will come up, and you'll have the option to go buy it or not. All right.
I have a question.
Sure.
On the card where it says just you, does that mean me and my kids or just me?
Just, I believe that means just you and your kids, I would think. I think that just you is just saying like not your cat, but Kayla or Beth, if you want to clarify that for me.
Okay.
Yeah.
I would say just you, just basically whatever you make a decision, like if you're not 100% sure about what it means, make a decision of what it means and stick with it.
Yeah, there you go. Thank you, Kayla. Like I said, this is intended to be kind of confusing and like hard to navigate. So, all right, anyone else? No? Okay, if you need to, take a moment to relook over your character card and then we will begin.
I'm sorry, I think Cindy has a question.
I'm sorry, I don't know, my computer is really slow, so it takes me a long time to go down the list. So just keep that in mind. I don't want to stop things.
Okay. Yeah, and if anyone's having trouble, I do obviously want everyone to be able to participate, but I know that there's a lot of people in this training and I want us to be able to stay on time as well. So if you end up following along, that's okay too. You can always join in the discussion at the end. All right. Okay, so everyone take a deep breath, step out of your shoes, and imagine what it would be like to be this person. So here we go. Everyone is beginning at home. So to everyone, every Wednesday you go out with your friends for dinner. For those who do not have friends in the area, you have a workout class or another activity that you love to go to every Wednesday. This Wednesday, as you prepare to leave, your partner starts to yell at you. Your partner is so upset that you cancel your plans. You are concerned about your partner's increasingly controlling behavior. What do you do? So when I say what do you do, that gives you the option to leave or stay wherever you're at. And if you choose to leave, make sure you hold that up where you're going. Okay, got some friends and family, some people staying home. All right, great, great. Thank you so much. Okay, to those of you who are still at home, a few weeks later, you plan to go visit someone. Your partner is not feeling well, but you decide to go anyways. Your partner becomes angry, grabs you hard on the arm, and pushes you into the living room wall. You think your partner may have bruised your arm. What do you do? All right. Great. Now, and just remember, if you choose to go places, make sure you're crossing off how much it costs or deleting it on your Word document. If you're staying in the same place, no need to pay unless I ring that bell. Okay, to those at home, a few months later, you go shopping with your partner. Your partner is unhappy because you spent too much money on groceries. Your partner argues with you on the way to the car and slams your hand in the door. What do you do? Okay. Got some hotel. Great. Awesome. Thank you guys so much. To those not at home, you left so quickly you need to buy some new clothes. If you want new clothes, it will cost you 1 money card. What do you do? If you plan to buy new clothes, raise your hand. If not, just keep your hand down. Okay? Great. Awesome. Thank you. Okay, that's the bell. So that means wherever you are, make sure you are paying that amount again or using that same amount of favor again. If you're somewhere where you're staying for free, no need to do anything. All right, to those at home. Several months later, your partner is angry that dinner is not ready. Your partner pushes you and you fall down the stairs and break 2 ribs. You may choose to seek medical care now. What do you do? If you choose to seek medical care, raise your hand. It will cost 1 money card. Okay. Oh wait, actually that's the next step. Sorry, everyone. All right, if you went to medical, your partner who pays for your insurance threatens to cancel your insurance policy if you do not return home. Without insurance, leaving costs 3 money cards so that you can get your meds. What do you do? So you can either pay 3 medical cards or 3 money cards to get your medicine, or you can return home and not pay. Okay, we've got some people who are going home. Great. All right, to those not at home, you decide to talk to your minister. Your minister reminds you that God doesn't give us more than we can bear. The pastor suggests that regular church attendance and prayer might improve your life. What do you do? So if you choose to go back home, you can, or move anywhere else. All right. So that's the bell. So wherever you're at, if you are not home or somewhere for free, make sure you're repaying. And if you can't afford it, make sure you make a move. All right. Okay, an apartment. All right. Great. Okay, to those not at home. Oh, sorry, that's the previous one. To those at home, a longtime friend calls and expresses concern about you and asks if you are okay. Telling her about the violence increases your fear that your partner will find out that you told someone. If you decide to tell her, it will cost you 1 favor card for her to keep it a secret. What do you do? So if you decide to tell her, go ahead and raise your hand and pay that 1 favor card. And if not, you can keep your hand down. All right, great. To those not at home, your partner begins to stalk you. You see the car when you are grocery shopping. You find footprints up to your bedroom window. One day you are walking down the street when your partner runs up behind you. They grab your bag and shake it out. Your phone, keys, and wallet fall to the ground. They grab your phone and run away, leaving you shaken up and without a phone. If you want to access legal services to get a restraining order and a divorce, you may do that now. You may also pay 1 money card to buy a new phone at this time. So if you decide to buy a new phone at this time, go ahead and put your hand up and pay that 1 money card. If not, no need. Great. For those of you at a friend or a relative's home, one night you overhear your family wondering if they should ask you to leave for their safety and the safety of their children. What do you do? So you have the option to move at this time if you're at a friend's or family's home. Okay. Sounds good. Great, thank you. We got some domestic violence shelters. Okay. Awesome. To everyone, your doctor recommends medication for anxiety. Filling the prescription costs 2 money cards. What do you do? So go ahead and raise your hand if you choose to pay for the anxiety medication. Okay. Great, thank you. All right. So that's the bell. So wherever you're at, make sure you're paying the cost. If you're somewhere for free, no need to pay. And if you need to move, then feel free to move. To those at home, one Friday night, your partner takes the shotgun out of the closet, lays it on the kitchen table, starts drinking, and threatens to kill you. You try to hide your partner's gun. Your partner finds it, loads it, and comes after you. You call 911. The sheriff comes and your partner tells the sheriff that they were going hunting, which is why the gun is out. The sheriff removes the bullets from the gun and tells you and your partner to settle down. The sheriff does not arrest you or your partner. What do you do? So that was for everyone home. Okay, got lots of people moving, some people staying home. All right, great, thank you. To those not at home, a pipe bursts where you are living and you must relocate. What do you do? So everyone who's not home must pick a new place to go at this time. All right. Okay. To those at home, at breakfast, you can't find your cat. Later that morning, you find your cat barely alive in your freezer. Your partner laughs and says, now he really is a popsicle. What do you do? All right, got some people leaving. Okay. Great, thank you. To those not at home, for people over 65 years of age and people with disabilities, the stress of the abuse has taken its toll. You now require ongoing daily medical assistance. Because of this increased need, the shelter and relatives' homes are no longer options. If you have resources, you can go to a hotel or an apartment and pay one favor card in addition to the cost of the hotel or apartment in order to have a friend come check on you and provide the ongoing medical assistance. You can go to a nursing home, or you can return home and have your partner provide ongoing medical care and assistance to you for free. So if you would like to move, go ahead and do that. For those of you who have jobs, your partner shows up at your job and makes a scene. They send you a message and tell you that you better come home or they will continue making your life hard. You love this job and want to keep it. Your supervisor has scheduled a meeting to talk to you tomorrow. What do you do? So that was for people who weren't home that had jobs. All right, great, thank you. All right, so for people who aren't home and for members of the LGBTQIA community, your partner has given you 24 hours to return home or they will out you to your employer and your family and say that they are afraid of you. What do you do? Home, okay. Great, thank you. For people with children still in your custody, and for people who aren't home, your children beg you to return home so they can be with their friends and their dad or mom or their new dad or mom. What do you do? All right, great. To those of you who are homeless, it's wintertime. A huge snowstorm hits Colorado and you must find somewhere to stay. What do you do? You've got a shelter. Great. Domestic violence shelter, okay. All right, that's the bell. So everyone go ahead and pay a favor card or the cost or move if you need to. And I'll give everyone a minute to do that, okay? Great. Okay, so that is the end of the activity. I do definitely want to talk about this with everyone. I also want to be aware of but let's go ahead and let's just get maybe some volunteers. If someone wants to kind of unmute themselves, let us know where they ended up and let us know what character they had. There were 5 different characters kind of sorted out between everyone here. So if I could just get someone to volunteer about that, that'd be great.
Hi, this is Pete. I was the 23-year-old Guatemalan undocumented woman with 2 small children and a cat. And I pretty much stayed home until, and let me see if I can remember this. So her ribs were broken down the stairs. I had stayed at a friend, and then I went to the friend's house and I came back home because my partner wouldn't pay the medical. And then, oh, the gun. I left and went to a friend's house who then had the pipe break. So then I went into an apartment and then I came back home and I can't remember what my partner's threat was at that time about, oh, gonna like ruin my job.
Mm-hmm.
So I came back home after he was interfering with my job, and that's kind of when we ended.
Gotcha.
But I pretty much tried to stay at home because of the two kids as long as I could.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for sharing. Does anyone with a different character want to let us know kind of where they ended up and when they ended up leaving home and read off who they had?
Yeah, I was a 45-year-old Black male who was living with what people thought was his roommate, but it was actually his gay partner. And he also, the 45-year-old male, also had two kids that were from his previous marriage, and he had full custody. And they had a cat. And when the first thing happened, like the partner grabbed the male by the arm. That's when I left for a friend's house, since it was Wednesday and they usually go out with friends. So he canceled the dinner, but still went to the friend's house, and I had 3 favors. So I stayed there for 3 times until like the ding bell happened and I was out, and the character went to a hotel since it was cheaper than the apartment, and apartments usually have to have a down payment, which isn't really practical. And then stayed there until the kids asked to come back. So I was just doing it for a more financial thing. I didn't think about like the kids were at home the whole time. So yeah.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And I know maybe we have time for one more person to kind of read off their character. Does anyone who didn't have either of those, would you mind kind of sharing your character and what you kind of did to work through that?
Sure. I was a 32-year-old Japanese woman who moved to the US to marry a man I met online.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't have any favors or friends or family, and I had limited financial resources. So I stayed at home until the ribs were broken, and then I had to get medical care because I'm pregnant. So I spent most of my money on that. And then I stayed home until the gun incident, when I spent the rest of my money on a hotel, and then I ended up with no money at a shelter.
Gotcha. Yeah, so I mean, that in itself, I want to see, Molly, I'm going to ask you this question in a second, Molly Dixon. But Jennifer, how many, if you wouldn't mind telling everyone how many money signs and how many favors you had when you started?
So no favors and 5 money signs.
Okay, and Molly, how many did you have?
3 favors and 15 money signs I ended with.
Wow.
Right, yeah. So a lot of the reason that we like to kind of give out different characters is just to show that people can start off with all of these different obstacles in general. I mean, even with like obviously not like knowing English or not being allowed to learn the language, that's a huge barrier. Being pregnant, having kids, there can be a lot of different obstacles for everybody. So we also like to just clarify at the end, like, did everyone feel like those decisions had to be made like really quickly, and there was like a lot of pressure to make them really quickly? And also how difficult it was to not be able to talk with anyone about what that decision was going to be like. Yeah, and that's kind of like why we like to do that, is because a lot of times survivors maybe don't have that support system to turn to and ask, what they should do, or what they think is right, or maybe they feel like that guilt and shame and aren't really able to reach out. So that's kind of like how we like to get people in their shoes as well. I'm going to go ahead and pass it back off to Maddie. I know we don't have a whole lot of time, but thank you everyone for participating so much. If we have time at the end and you do want to process this a little more, we can definitely do that. But thank you so much. I appreciate everyone participating.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Yes, of course. Thank you all for being down to check your emails and get into that so quickly. Really appreciate it. So I am going to get back in here. Oh, I hate when that happens. Okay, one sec. Okay. So just a reminder, after that activity, I know we went through it pretty quickly, but it can be super heavy and a lot of times draining to try to step into the shoes of somebody experiencing abuse. I know we have all have our own experiences throughout our lives, and of course working with people who have experienced abuse. So if you all have time today, I would love to encourage you to take some time to take care of yourself, whatever that looks like for you. Just remember that I gave you permission and asked you to do it. I know sometimes it can be hard to set aside time in our days to take care of ourselves, but it is super important, especially when we're talking about topics like domestic violence. So now we're going to take a little bit of a break. Let's just do, it's 10:23. Let's do until 10:26, so 3 minutes if that's all right. I wish I could do a little bit longer, but we are trying to talk about a lot of topics today. So take some time, take care of yourselves, and we'll come back in a few minutes. Alrighty, I think we're gonna start coming back if everybody's available. We'll give it another second. I see a lot of people are still away from their computers. Have some very exciting safety planning to talk about, so please do come back. All right, awesome. Thanks so much. Hopefully you had a few minutes to take care of yourselves, and we're gonna keep going. So let's talk about safety planning. I know when we were here last time, everyone had a lot of questions about safety planning and wanting to get into it. And it's actually one of the main reasons we decided to create a DV 201 because up until now we just had a DV 101. But really we could spend a long time talking about safety planning. It causes a lot of stress thinking about trying to be responsible for someone else's safety. And so I just want to say that it's a big topic and we'll talk about it a lot today, but there's always more to discuss and more to consider. So I just want to preface this section with that. So safety planning is anything you can do to enhance a survivor's emotional, physical, or mental safety before, during, and after an abusive relationship. So it's really important for safety plans to be broad so that they can talk about or take into consideration all these types of different ways to be safe, but safety planning is very flexible as well. So safety plans address how to remain safe in the relationship, maybe file a police report or get a protection order, cope with emotions, leave safely, even disclose to family and friends. And so as you can see here, a safety plan, I think when a lot of people consider what a safety plan is or looks like, they'll think of maybe like an emergency plan, which we will touch on as well. But safety plans can talk about or take into consideration any type of safety, not just physical. So safety plans must be, of course, client-driven and centered. Again, that empowerment model that we talked about, keeping that in mind. Helpful at any stage of the relationship. Strengths-based rather than deficit-oriented, which we'll talk about too. So understand that survivors are experts of their own situations and relationships, and again, assuming that they have taken many steps to keep themselves and their children safe, which I know I already touched on, but it's again really important when thinking about safety plans, because I think we all have our own ideas of what safety might look like, but it's really important to keep in mind that safety looks different for everyone, and different survivors or different clients might have different levels of safety that they want to attain for themselves. And it's important to respect that, even if it maybe makes us a little bit nervous and it's not what we would want for ourselves. So here is a great graphic about different types of basic safety planning. So for parent and child safety, these are different types of safety plans that you can create, or different things to keep in mind when creating maybe a longer or more general safety plan that wants to take into consideration all of these types of safety. So accessing shelter, again, reaching out to a DV agency can be part of a safety plan, either at the time of creating it or keeping in mind that depending on what changes in the relationship, you can reach out to an advocate. Having a separate or more specific safety plan for kids, accessing protection orders, again, having that escape or emergency plan, and identifying supportive friends and family who you can either share the safety plan with or just have included in the safety plan to reach out to. So here are some good questions to ask when you're thinking about or beginning to create a safety plan with one of your clients. And these are questions that we ask as well when we're doing that. So asking, what are some of the cues, behaviors, or circumstances that are present before abusive situations happen? So of course, really important to set that context in place when you're thinking about creating a safety plan. So before you can talk about what will keep you safe, you have to talk about what will come up maybe in your life that will signal to you that it's time to look at my safety plan. It's time to consider my different strategies for accessing safety. What have you tried to protect yourself and your children in the past, and which of these strategies have worked and which would you use again? So it's really important that we're not putting things on safety plans that don't work for survivors, or maybe that they've already tried out, again, keeping in mind that they are often assessing for and adjusting their behaviors and actions to keep themselves safe at all times throughout the relationship and many different times throughout the day. So this is really important so that you make sure everything on a safety plan is applicable to this client or this survivor, and that you don't have anything on there that maybe hasn't helped or that they've already tried. What situations are you most afraid of? Again, safety looks different for everyone. So making sure that, you know, something that might sound really scary to me might be super normal for a client. And maybe at some point in our work together, we'll try to talk about and maybe unpack recognizing different triggers or red flags, but keeping in mind that different situations could be really important to some survivors and not important to other ones. And it's important to make sure, again, everything on the safety plan is applicable specifically to that client. So there's not really one set of like framework or ideas to have on a safety plan that will be good for everyone. We'll talk about some ideas that we can keep in mind for everyone, but just recognize that Again, these will be very different depending on who you're working with. What have you thought of that might help you, and what do you fear the most? Or what have you thought of that might help you with what you fear the most? So letting that client control or make most of the decisions about what goes on their safety plan and what they try to keep themselves and their kids safe. And what can you do to increase your independence? What legal resources in your community are available to you? What kinds of emotional support are available in your community? So assessing the support system that somebody might already have or supports that they could potentially reach out to. This is really important to keep in mind because many survivors are super isolated from their support system and from their community. So trying to reach back out to people who might be willing to support them or get a better idea of different community resources is a really great first step. So an emergency plan, I think this is what people think of most often when they think of safety planning, and it is very important, especially to sort of have as a first safety plan, and then maybe getting a little bit more in depth later on with someone. But thinking about where would somebody go if they had to leave, like if they're in immediate danger and they need to get out of their situation, need to get out of their house, what would that look like? How would they get there? Different modes of transportation. What would they take with them? We always like to say, have your phone if you have it, any keys you might need, if you can stash money aside, an ID or a passport, immigration paperwork, depending on what you are needing, what your immigration status is, and different medications. I like to recommend to clients to try to have a bag packed with all of these things hidden away somewhere if they feel like they might need to escape at a certain point. Of course, not accessible for everyone, but it can give that extra level of confidence and safety so that somebody's able to leave their situation quickly if they need to. And keep in mind, who can they contact for support? Again, thinking about that support system. I saw the chat box go off. I don't know if somebody maybe had a question.
Yes, someone asked, since the location of domestic violence shelters are confidential, how does someone find a phone number for one nearby?
So the phone numbers for shelters will oftentimes be public information that we can share as well. And different shelters and agencies, they'll tell you like the general area, like town or county that a shelter will be in. So it's pretty easy to identify what is nearby and how to contact them. And then if somebody is approved for space or able to go into shelter, then the advocates at shelter will coordinate transportation and let somebody know where their shelter is. And we can share different links and resources with you as well if you'd like to get educated about different shelters in the area. Does that answer that question? Okay, thanks. Okay, so we're going to do a really quick activity. I'll just need like maybe one person to unmute themselves for each slide that we get to after this. So basically I'm going to put up on the screen some different examples of things that clients might say to you, and then ask about what information you might want to know more if you're thinking about maybe trying to assess for safety or create a safety plan with someone. So the first one, when your client says, my partner threatens me, and I'm afraid of them, what more might you want to know? And what are some options? Any ideas?
Is this a one-time occurrence or is it chronic?
Yeah, absolutely. When your client says, my ex seems to show up everywhere I am, what are some options and what more might you want to know from them?
Are you worried about your safety?
Yeah, absolutely.
Do they already know where you're going, or are they kind of stalking you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. When your client says, I'm scared of what my partner might do if I have to leave, what more might you want to know? And maybe what are some options?
Are you afraid for yourself? Are you afraid for your kids? Are you afraid that what your partner might do to him or herself?
Yeah, that's definitely a great question. Oftentimes people will threaten self-harm. And I think it's definitely important to figure out here, like, what exactly are you afraid of, or who are you afraid that they might harm? When your client, oh, go ahead.
Saying the last question, is this fear based on what the partner has stated, or is it just a feeling about it?
Mm-hmm. For sure, that can be a good question in trying to assess what has already happened or what threats might be present, and maybe even getting down to which type of abuse this person might be experiencing.
I'd want to, I'm sorry,
No,
I'm not
okay, go ahead.
managing the screen quite right. I'd want to try to find or identify someone who'd be willing to let me be with them that maybe the partner didn't know or didn't know where they lived.
Okay, like trying to find a safe person to go.
Yes.
Awesome, yes, for sure. When your client says, I really don't feel like leaving is an option, but I want to make sure my children are safe. What more might you want to know, and what might be some options? Maybe something to say to the person or resources to look into.
I would ask why they don't feel leaving is an option, and specifically, what are their concerns for the child's safety?
Yes, wonderful. Any other ideas about this one? This is very common.
I would also ask if they have left before or attempted to leave and how that played out.
Absolutely. I also think this could be a good opportunity to, say something like, well, I hear you're saying you want to make sure your kids are safe, but can we talk about, maybe the fact that you also deserve to be safe and be in a space that feels comfortable for you. Oftentimes people will feel like they want to center their kids' safety and continue to put themselves at risk to sort of protect their children. But this is a great opportunity to reassure your client and maybe spend some time building that relationship and letting them know that they deserve safety. Sometimes safety planning is having people around you that make you feel like you deserve to be happy and successful. When your client says, I've left, but I'm really starting to miss them, what more might you want to know, and what are some options?
I would ask them what part of that person that they miss. What are the good parts of that person that they miss?
Yeah, that's great. Could be there an opportunity, if they're missing like friendship or someone to do something with, then safety planning could be finding out what their community is like, what their other supports are like, and finding other ways to fulfill those needs. Any other ideas here?
You have a reason to believe anything would be different if you went back.
Definitely a good thought, for sure. We're talking just in general more about, what that would look like, what going back would look like. And then if you feel like you have a client who has maybe left their relationship and is thinking about going back, can be really hard to refrain from telling them, no, please don't do that. You're doing so great. You've made a lot of progress. But then maybe, okay, it sounds like you're missing someone. If you're deciding to go back to them, can we talk about what safety might look like? Just empowering them, letting them know that even if they do decide to go back to their partner, you're still a support for them. You're still here to listen to them and help them plan for their safety and connect them with resources. I think oftentimes people assume that if they go back to their partner, they'll then be cut off from the resources or punished in some way or not able to access the same support they did when they were separated from their partner. Okay, great. Thank you so much for all of your input. That was really wonderful. So I know that we have stepped into the shoes of a person experiencing abuse, and now we're switching gears again and coming back into our shoes as advocates and service providers. So let's talk a little bit about some questions to ask if you suspect abuse, and you all just thought of some great ones, so we can touch on some more. So here are some indirect questions. Maybe you're not sure how to start the conversation. You might not have much of a relationship built with the person yet, but you're trying to get there and sort of start to let them know that you're here for them to sort of disclose what they've been dealing with and open up to you. So just how are things going at home? What are your stress levels like? Finding out, how somebody feels about their work life versus their home life can be a great indicator. If somebody has a great time at work and then at home they're feeling really stressed and upset, that could be sort of an indicator or a red flag that something is wrong and it's not just a stress issue, but more of an environment issue. How do you feel about the relationships in your life? Super broad. Oh, I'm so sorry, the phone is ringing. I'm just going to mute myself for a second because I can't stop it. Okay, it got sort of quieter, so I'm going to keep going. Hopefully you can hear me okay. So yeah, how do you feel about the relationships in your life? Super broad. I think even if somebody hasn't disclosed abuse, or if you don't suspect there to be abuse, this could be a great question to just ask any person you're working with. Of course, in our jobs, when people come to us, we already know that they're dealing with abuse. But I think for people who, of course, you experience this a lot in your work, but maybe not all the time, this could be a great question to ask. How does your partner treat you? And are you having any problems with your partner? Also really great. These are good ways to sort of get into that conversation. And then when you're ready to ask more direct questions, has anyone close to you ever threatened or hurt you? I've heard you mention these problems about your partner before. Can you tell me a little bit more about what that looks like when these things happen? Or if you felt like, they've ever threatened you or hurt you? Making sure that you can have a conversation about the difference between like fights that are regular and healthy relationships, and maybe if they become physical, or if their partner escalates their behavior during fights. Of course, highlighting that it's normal for people to fight and have disagreements. And what kinds of experiences with violence have you had in your life? This one can be kind of difficult. If you have a good enough relationship with someone where you feel like you can ask this, that can be really great in assessing for a pattern of maybe some PTSD that somebody might be experiencing, or what their relationships look like even outside of their intimate partner relationship. Here are some more questions for emotional abuse and stalking. Do you feel fearful for your safety or well-being at home? Do you ever feel that you can't do something because you fear that your partner will get angry or react aggressively? Again, looking for that indicator that the person you're working with has to make themselves smaller for their partner or within their relationship or at home. Again, talking about stalking, I know we just had one of those little scenario questions like that, but is your partner sort of like showing up when you didn't think they were near there? And also talking about technological abuse is super common nowadays, with, of course, phones, computers, everything, messages. So wondering, like, does your partner look through your media? Like, do you feel like you have, your own phone and technology away from your partner? And then here are some questions for sexual abuse and isolation and control. I would say that, sexual abuse is really difficult to talk about. Oftentimes, these aren't conversations that I start with clients. But if you have that relationship with someone and you're already talking about different types of abuse, some of these can be really helpful if somebody has already disclosed, having issues with sexual abuse in the past, trying to assess what that looks like in their current relationship. Isolation and control, probably one of the major, most common forms of abuse. Isolation will come with all of the other types of abuse oftentimes. So talking about, like, do you feel like you're isolated from your support system? Or oftentimes even the word isolated can feel foreign to someone who might not understand that that's what they're experiencing, but just maybe asking questions about the other supports in their lives, like if they have friendships and relationships with their family outside of their relationship. Okay, so we have covered a lot today, and thank you so much. We're going to talk about some family tree resources and what our programs look like, but before I do that, does anybody have any questions about safety planning or questions that you can ask people if you suspect they're experiencing abuse? We'll have a section for questions in a little bit as well, but we do have a few minutes. Okay, let's talk about family tree then. So we talked about this last time as well, and hopefully some of you have worked with us before or know about family trees programs, but I think it's really important to touch upon because we are quite a big agency with many different programs addressing the issues of child abuse, homelessness, and domestic violence. Of course, these issues are super interrelated, as you all know. So our programs within those realms are housing and family stabilization services, DV services or domestic violence services, and our child and youth services. So within our child and youth programs, we have our kinship program, which provides support and resources for people who are guardians of kids within their family but who are not their parents. We have our community family resource team, which is our team of in-home therapists. They only receive referrals through Jefferson County Child Welfare, but it's still a really great thing to be aware of if you have somebody who's involved with CYF or with CPS in Jeffco, if they're needing in-home therapy for youth and family therapy as well. We have our Safe Care program, who provides several different programs around like baby proofing a home or making sure that parents are aware of like safe play ideas, what to do in emergencies. They're also an in-home program. Within our homelessness umbrella, we have House of Hope, which is a shelter for homeless women and children. It is not a confidential location, so might not always be the best idea for people who are experiencing domestic violence, but depending on the situation, you know, homelessness and domestic violence, of course, are really interrelated. So it's good to have an idea of that as well, and that is located in Englewood. We have our homelessness program, which is not a shelter, but it is a family tree program that provides resources and housing for people who are homeless. We're looking for different housing options. We also have Goals, which is a newer program of ours. It is a shelter in Aurora for homeless families, and it's sort of a longer term stay that helps people like really get back on their feet and make sure that when they're exiting, they're getting into a great housing situation for them. And then our domestic violence programs. So we have our program, which is the Domestic Violence Outreach Program. We provide individual and group advocacy for survivors of domestic violence. All of our support groups right now are virtual, but they've been really successful and we have them every week. So that can be a great resource. And we also provide, so that support and advocacy, we're not therapists, but it's sort of counseling that we can provide for people, just someone to talk to about what they're going through, what they're experiencing, and then we're also here to connect people with different resources and advocate for them within systems and within different other community resources they might be accessing. And normally when it's not during a pandemic, we also provide mobile advocacy, so we can meet people out in the community at like a Starbucks or maybe on their lunch break at work or something if it's not safe for them to come into our office in Wheat Ridge, or if it's not accessible for some reason. We also have our legal advocacy program. They're located within the Jefferson County Courthouse in the Victim Witness Office, if you're familiar with sort of the layout there. And they can provide advocacy and resources around civil legal matters like civil protection orders, divorce and custody. And then they also partner pretty closely with different lawyers and can provide referrals for legal representation and resources as well. We have Roots of Courage, which is our 24-hour, they have a 24-hour crisis line, and it is our domestic violence shelter in a confidential location. This is for survivors of domestic violence and their children, not full families, just for survivors, and they are an emergency shelter. This is their hotline number. It is 24 hours and as a crisis line, and is also the number to reach out to if you have clients who are looking to access shelter. We also have our parenting time program. They provide supervised visitation and safe exchanges, and they are still functioning as of now. So that can be an awesome resource if you have somebody who is co-parenting with an abusive partner and they're not wanting to interact with each other when coordinating visitation and exchanges of the kids.
So we do have, oh, it's question time. We do have a question. So, and I do not know the answer to this, so I'm hoping Maddie or Sarah does. If not, we're probably going to learn tomorrow, ironically. So before COVID, I was a volunteer for the kinship program as a paralegal. How is Family Tree handling this program through COVID?
Kinship.
Yeah. I do know, I mean, I can say that if possible, every single program is doing things remotely as much as possible, but I don't know the specifics about them. Sarah?
Yeah, I also am not sure of exactly how their program has shifted during COVID, but I do know that all of our programs are still functioning as best as we can, and that they're definitely still available to provide resources and support to families who qualify.
Yeah.
And that, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say, yep. I think that's correct. Yeah, we'll know more details tomorrow, unfortunately, but as of right now, everything is still operating. It just procedure might look a little different.
Yeah, I would definitely recommend reaching out to different programs and getting a better idea of what has shifted and how they can still support your clients right now. We have so many programs, it can be really hard to keep track of what everybody's doing.
Mm-hmm. Especially when we're all remote and not near each other too, it is kind of difficult to keep up with each other.
Yeah.
Another question, how many of our services are open to residents of Adams and Broomfield counties? It sounds like some are only for Jefferson County.
For sure. So our program we can provide support regardless of what county somebody is living in. Of course, it might be more accessible for people who are closer, but we are contracted with Adams County and work really closely with them as well, and can always provide resources for them and support for people who are in Adams. A lot of our programs are county specific, but I would say that we're always open for people reaching out and for us to connect them with the right resources in their county. I know domestic violence services are pretty limited in Adams County, which is why we make ourselves available and why we're here to support survivors. And normally before COVID, it was probably didn't feel as accessible for people living in Adams or farther away. But because we've been able to shift so seamlessly to working virtually, we have been able to provide resources for people who are living in Adams, I think, more often now.
And can you go back to the slide with the 4 programs so they can
Absolutely.
see it? Is this the one you're asking for? And then, cool, yes. And then who is the contact for the kinship program? I am looking this up if you all don't know.
As for a specific person, I'm not sure.
Mm-hmm. Looks like Tina.
Oh, probably Tina.
Yep.
So I'll put their main phone number in there, and then you can ask for Tina. And there aren't any other questions at the moment.
Okay. Does anybody have any other questions or thoughts, comments? All right, well, we still have a few minutes, but if we're all set with questions, that's great too. Thank you all so much for being here. We really appreciate it. This is actually our first time doing a DV201 workshop. So hopefully it was good for all of you and that you learned something. We're always here if you'd like to reach out with any questions. I wasn't sure if Kayla was joining us when I created this, so I didn't put her contact info on here. But if you'd like to reach out to us, please feel free to do so. And again, if you'd like to reach out to any other of our programs, we're always here to provide resources. Oh, I'm sorry, Sarah, I forgot to put your email in there.
That's cool. I just threw it in the chat. So.
Okay, cool. Thank you.